Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening for wherever you are joining us. We are excited to be here today to be able to talk about youth news, television, youth news for the kids around the world. And so today we have several guests with us. I'd like to start off by introducing everyone, and then we will get right to questions for our panelists. So first off, Sandra Cavid is a social communicator journalist from the Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana de Medellin, Colombia. She has studied in film and television production for children and young people at the EICTV of San Antonio de Lebañas, Cuba, as well as an official master's degree in technology, learning, and education from the Universidad de País Vasco, Spain. She works as director of the multimedia content production company of the Global Democracy and Development Foundation, FUNGLUD, a think tank located in the Dominican Republic, where knowledge content is produced from the academic work carried out by the foundation in video and television aimed at national and international audiences. She has worked producing children's television content since the beginning of her career, and for 3 years, she has directed the children's news program Noticiocos, which is broadcast weekly on television in the Dominican Republic, the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico. Hi. So our next guest is Jan Willem Boot, and he is an award-winning international film and television maker from the Netherlands. His work for children is known by his philosophy, Children in the Center, based on a strong belief in the autonomy of children and the anarchy in content. Since 2014, he is fully dedicated to create, produce, and support media for children internationally, mostly outside of Europe. His work has expanded now to 65 countries worldwide. Currently, he is also the head of Children, Youth, and Media at Dutch NGO Free Press Unlimited and leads the Wadada News for Kids project that has developed tailor-made news for children or youth in already 21 countries worldwide. Before 2014, Jan Willem Boot was the creative head for KRO Netherlands Public Broadcasting for 16 years, in which he created and produced over 125 films, programs, and series, and was the head of several terrestrial and digital channels. Welcome. Our next guest is Mohtab Chapi, who is a multimedia content producer with experience in writing and audiovisual production of various broadcast, commercial, and social responsibility content. He serves as a board director for Vezuele Media, which is a media content production company in South Africa. He manages a national media literacy program that has been active for over 9 years. As a journalism graduate, Mohtab produces news content for a news for kids television program that is produced by Vezuele Media called Bona Retsang. A television program is a member of the Wadada News for Kids global network established by the Netherlands-based Free Press Unlimited. See the connection there. And then lastly, but not least, we also have Maya Gotts, who is the head of the International Center Institute for the Youth and Educational Television, IZI, of the Belgisch Rundfunk Bavarian Broadcasting Corporation in Munich, Germany. And she is also head of the Prix Jeunesse Foundation. Her main field of work is research in the area of children, youth, and television, and gender-specific reception research. She conducts empirical studies, such as gender representation in children's TV worldwide and its meaning for girls and boys. She also looks at fears, nightmares that children get from television, and also what's so funny. She's conducted over 200 studies to foster quality in children's current TV programs, and she has published more than 270 articles and 15 books in the field of children, young people, and television. And last but not least, we also have a translator for our panelists when it's needed. So Mauricio Espinoza is an assistant professor of Spanish and Latin America Cultural Studies at the University of Cincinnati. So welcome, everyone. I thought we would get started by having our producers talk a little bit about their programs that they produce to try to give our audience an understanding of what types of news programs are being produced for children around the world. So if you don't mind, let's start with Motba. And please, Motba, can you tell me about the children's news program that you produce? Who's your target audience? How old are the children? And how is the program distributed?
Yes, good evening, everyone, all the way from Johannesburg, South Africa, wherever you are based. So we produce a television program called Bona Retsang 2.0. It has evolved over time. It is produced for a target audience that is aged between 8 and 12 years old, which is a lot younger than our initial target audience when we first started off. That was around 16 at the time. Our median target audience was 16 when the television program started in 2014. And ever since it has evolved, the television program was about 24 minutes long at the time. It used to broadcast on a national broadcaster in South Africa, which gave us a bigger audience. But over time, because of funding and other challenges, the television program has developed into a 5-minute long television program, but still broadcasts on a great platform, which is a paid television platform in South Africa with this younger audience or target audience. But yeah, the distribution phase is still on television. And it reaches the program or the platform that it broadcasts on at the moment is not necessarily South African based, so it reaches out to at least 40 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and that's a large audience base. And we found that making it a bit shorter, 5 minutes, actually works for us, because even right now the television program plays at least 3 times a day on the television program. So one episode will play at least 3 times a day, meaning that we can reach a larger audience.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for talking about that. And so I'd like to go to another panelist to see how television for news for kids is produced in a different country. So Sandra, are you available to speak?
Sí, gracias. Muy bien, pues desde República Dominicana agradecemos esta invitación a participar en este panel.
From the Dominican Republic, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to talk in this panel.
Producimos un noticiero infantil llamado Notichicos, que está dirigido a niños de 6 a 13 años de edad.
We produce a kids news show that is called Notichicos, basically kids news translated into English, and the target audience is kids from 6 years to 13 years of age.
Tiene 4 años de estarse emitiendo, es de media hora, del formato media hora de duración, unos 25 minutos de programa, y se emite con frecuencia semanal.
Okay, so the show has been around for 4 years. It's a 30-minute segment, about 25 minutes of actual production, and it is a weekly show.
Y se emite por un canal de televisión de cobertura nacional, un canal privado, y adicionalmente se emite por un canal de televisión por cable que cubre Estados Unidos, Canadá y Puerto Rico, dirigido a los dominicanos en esos países.
So the show is on a national private television channel, and then in addition to that, it's also on a cable channel outside of the Dominican Republic that is broadcast in the US, Canada, and Puerto Rico. And the goal of that is to reach Dominicans who live outside of the island.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. And then Jan Willem, if you could tell us a little bit about the television you produce and also about the Wadada Network.
Yes, thank you. Yes, news is a part of my work. It has been a very big part in the last 5 years. Now I'm trying to balance it more with drama and documentary and a lot of other stuff. So yes, my experience is in children's television, children's film. Like you said in the introduction, I've been working through the national television in the Netherlands on a lot of various productions and broadcasts. And I took that experience in 2014 to a Dutch NGO that is Free Press Unlimited, who is working around the world, especially in countries where press freedom is under pressure. And what I'm doing there is I'm representing their activities in children and youth area. And for news, we have, for instance, a research project that is called Keeping It Real. Mathoba was also involved in that in South Africa, and in Mexico, for instance. And Wadada News for Kids is one of the big projects of Free Press Unlimited, especially targeting on children and youth, because Free Press Unlimited, the majority of these projects are not for children or youth. So this is a small section of the organization, but it is in a lot of countries. So since 2014, we have managed to develop, to further develop, that was something that was already started 10 years before in 2004, which was called Kids News Network, an initiative to set up News for Kids programs in countries where, for instance, children's rights were not well treated, or where children were not represented in media at all, or not well. The first country to do so was in Suriname. So this NGO, Free Press Unlimited, sent out experienced reporters to train people there, and there started a program called 10 Minuten Jeugdjournaal, which means 10 minutes youth news. It is still there since 2004. It's daily, and it's a miracle, especially those people who managed to keep that alive in that country, which went through a lot of deep economical and political crises. So that is a great example of how the experience of a country that makes news for kids on a high level, like the Netherlands since 1980, can, with that experience, can export that experience. And as they started in 2004, and they did it in some 10 other development countries. And when I left Public TV in 2014 and joined Free Press Unlimited, they also wanted to make some changes, because first of all, television was still important and is still important, but it's not the only thing anymore. So in 2014, we developed the Wadada News for Kids format. So from Kids News Network, it became Wadada News for Kids in 2014. We expanded also to not development countries. I'm also working in countries and teaching in countries and supporting countries where Wadada itself is not available. For instance, I had a great conversation years ago with Sandra when there was the initiative to make News for Kids in Dominican Republic. And so I'm in touch with a lot of countries that want to know more about News for Kids, maybe don't have the possibility yet, but doing so through Free Press Unlimited in already 21 countries worldwide, a News for Kids, which could be for children or for youth, was established. Not all of those countries are producing today, but the people who are there, who were trained, who have experience, are always ready to start again. And this is how we could restart South Africa this year with this great team of Vuselela Media and Mathoba. Also we will restart News for Kids in Ecuador soon, and hopefully more countries, and also new countries to come. The strength of this project is that there's knowledge and experience that is shared among the people, and that people can exchange materials. So you're producing in South Africa, that item can travel to Ukraine, to Mexico, and vice versa. And that is also very essential in News for Kids, is diversity. that is not only the national news that I see in some countries, but it's also to open up to the stories from kids from around the world. And that is what Wadada News for Kids is initiating.
Well, thank you. The network is just phenomenal. And I find it so refreshing that you can support each other. And that is part of the reason why we can also do this panel where we can discuss different aspects of news for youth. So one thing that I'm particularly interested in as it relates also to media literacy is how you think about your audience. So we'll start perhaps with Jan Willem. What do you think is especially important when creating news stories for children that's different than creating news for adults?
Well, it's not so much different. It is that children are in a different stage of development, and that makes the difference. But news has to be with the same intention, you know, and with the same quality approach. Of course, and also, this is a very strong point that we always make in Wadada News for Kids and in Free Press Unlimited. News is a genre. So also the way it looks like, the way, for instance, the anchor behaves is vital, is essential for a news program for kids. What it needs is you need to have a 24/7 dedication, commitment, and being with your target group. You have to really think of cross-media strategies because like adults, children are not one. It's not one audience. It's a multitude of diversity of audiences that you have to deal with. I mean, if you have an adult audience of, let's say, 40 to 45, they're more or less in the same age development. Okay, there's a lot of difference between adults, but let's say there's not a big age difference between 40 and 45, but an age between 8 and 12 is massive. You know, that is 30, 40% of a lifetime. So in those years, many things happen. So in order to connect with them, you really have to know everything about how to tell a story, how to connect with them, how to write, how to put your camera, how to edit, what do you do with sound, which news can connect with them, and how can you make the news, or how can you look for relevant and urgency in their target group. And that is a huge and deep specialization. And what I also changed in 2014 from Kids News Network to Wadada News for Kids was that in the first 10 years, it was very much a journalistic project and trying to make journalists getting enthusiastic to make news for kids. But when you don't choose after you have studied for children, you hardly ever end up in children. So it is very hard for a journalist who is dreaming of interviewing the president for a million audience to have that journalist, and with all respect I say this, to have that journalist making news for kids, which is a deep and deep specialization. And sure, Maya will give great examples of how deep that specialization is. So we changed by focusing to people who are working with kids on a daily basis, especially in media, of course. And I found out that it's easier to have someone who's working for kids, let's say in drama or documentary and animation, to have that person work on a journalistic level and make a news program, than vice versa. And that is also fascinating. That's some of the experiences that I had.
Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to add to that? Sandra?
Sí, claro. Bueno, de nuestra parte, Notichicos es un formato híbrido entre noticiero y magazine. No cubrimos la misma agenda noticiosa que cubre el noticiero para adultos.
So Notichicos is a hybrid format in our case between news and more of a magazine type of show. So we're not covering the same type of news that regular news shows would cover.
De esa agenda, digamos, de adultos, tomamos aquellos temas que son de interés o preocupación para los niños, como las elecciones, bueno, la pandemia y la prevención frente a a la pandemia o, por ejemplo, las relaciones entre República Dominicana y Haití.
Okay. So from a typical news show for adults, we pick some stories that may be also of interest to kids. So for example, obviously things about the pandemic. Other examples will be, about the tense relationships between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. So things that kids will also be interested in.
Y adicional a eso, trabajamos temas que son de bastante relevancia para los niños, como por ejemplo la conservación del medio ambiente, la protección de los animales, el bullying y ya otros temas que son relevantes para los niños. Y con esa mezcla es que generamos, digamos que la parrilla de temas de cada uno de los capítulos.
And so in addition to that, we pick topics that are of particular interest to children. So for example, environmental conservation, animal welfare, and then bullying, things that are very specific to their age. And mixing those, sort of broader topics with the kid-specific topics, that's how we come up with the schedule for each show.
Para nosotros es muy, muy importante que NotiChicos sirva como un espacio de reconocimiento para los niños, en particular porque la oferta de televisión infantil de producción nacional es muy, muy escasa en este país.
So it is very important for us that the show will recognize and reflect kids' interests, especially because in this country, there's very little available specifically for kids in the media.
Entonces nos enfocamos en que sirva como espacio para que los niños se conozcan entre ellos, porque probablemente pues no lo hacen en la vida real los niños diversos, el niño del campo, el niño de la ciudad, el niño deportista o el niño que toca violín, el niño afro o el niño que tiene más rasgos indígenas.
And also another big goal is that kids will get to know each other through the show, so that they may not have other opportunities to do that. And diversity is a big key, of the show, that children from various backgrounds, socioeconomic, racial, Afro-Dominicans, those of indigenous descent, athletes, those who practice the arts, music, etc., so that they will be that mix and that they'll get to know each other and recognize, the diversity and the differences in the country.
Y por otro lado, pues nos enfocamos en el reconocimiento, en que NotiChicos y aparecer en NotiChicos se convierta en una legitimación, en una valoración para el niño siendo tal como es, con su forma de su cabello, con sus intereses particulares, independientemente de en qué sector de la ciudad viva, porque hay tan pocos espacios para que los niños se vean en televisión que este se convierte en una gran oportunidad que le suma a su valoración personal.
Also, for the children who are on the show, it's very important as a way of validation. So validating who they are, regardless of what part of the city they come from, what their hair looks like, what their heritage is, class, etc. So it's very important, since there are very few spaces for children to be themselves and to be visible. So we try to highlight and to put the focus on them.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra and Mauricio. And so finally, Motaba, what do you think? What do you think is especially important when creating news for kids?
Yeah, I think what we have discovered, and this is with being part of the international network that is the Wadada News for Kids program, is a big mind shift in terms of how you produce the content. I mean, generally, as young Willem said, that besides news being a genre, but there isn't much that is different, because news is news. It's information that is based on current events, and that's ultimately what's at the top of it. But the big difference that comes through is how you package the news or that information that is current. Like, for an example, right now, the one thing that has been at the center of all the countries around the world for the past 2 years is the COVID-19 pandemic. And that is current events. So there will be stories on traditional news platforms with adults that are going to be reporting on current events and information that is new about that. And a lot of the times you will find that it involves children as well. So, like, for example, when schools get closed because there's a lockdown that's coming through because the COVID numbers are going up, normally the news stories will report it generally from, okay, this is what's happening based on a specific format. So the formats are also important here. In the sense that, okay, you decide whether you want to do it in the form of a report or do you want to do it in the form of an interview. You choose the format, but then you package it differently in the sense that you're taking yourself down from the level of, okay, how would you want, or how can an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old process this information, and then you package it from that perspective. And I think that's where the difference is in the way that the information is packaged.
Great, thank you. And I'm also curious about child presenters. So Jan Willem mentioned about kind of the difference between being a journalist maybe first and addressing the child audience, but yet I also see child presenters, child anchors, and whatnot. So can you could you talk a little bit to that if you engage child presenters?
Yes, I can. And Maya did research about that, which fortunately connected very much also with our experience. Basically, what we know from our experience, which is working in different countries, getting in touch with the audience and finding out also how a program develops, is that the priority for the target group is to be informed by, let's say, young adults. That is a very strong connection that they have. I always say they need authority, because if you want to deal with very serious topics and your presenter has to say something about that, it is pretty odd when a 12-year-old says it. With all respect, but it's pretty odd, because you're talking about a level that is beyond. I mean, if you give kids exactly what they already know, you don't get anywhere. So you need to really work on a little bit higher level so they can really, grow to something. And the other thing that we also discovered is that 80% of the content of a subject, we can find the common knowledge among all the kids together. So if we have interviews with different kids, we ask them about a certain topic, they can already deliver, let's say 80% of the content that we need in our program. And the 20% the presenter can add. And that is usually on a little higher level, on a more developed level. So the presenter plays an important role there, not only as the face and maybe the brand sometimes of a program, but also to connect all these dots. And the interaction with kids we find very important. So we do a lot of things with those vox pops also. So it's a really combination of the story that you're following, the visual story that you're following, the reactions, the vox pops of kids that add to that subject, and the final information that they get from the presenter. In one exception, we did a Wadada project in Ukraine with a 12-year-old presenter, who, by the way, now is 18 and was just contracted for the National Film School. So it's also a great development part. But we also found out that for the subject we had to deal with in Eastern Ukraine, which is in war with Russia, where people are fled, a few million people have fled from their places, you really need an anchor that people give that authority. And for that, the 12-year-old was really too young, which doesn't mean that you can make like a newsy magazine show with kids, but that's something else than a news program where you want to deal with any topic that is relevant or urgent for kids.
Wonderful, thank you. And so Maya, since Jan William mentioned that you've done some research about presenters, would you mind talking a little bit about presenters?
Sure. We've just done our representative for Germany study on different what is interesting for kids, what do they value as news, and also what kind of moderator do they want. And you could see that the 6-year-old half of the 6-year-old can still imagine it can be a child, but as soon as they're 7, 8, 9 and older, they want a young adult or a youth person. Because they think it's more authority, they can believe it, and they can more trust in this person. So, which of course had nothing to do, I'm already looking at Sandra, because Sandra has a beautiful, really talented young moderator in her show, which is different because this Sandra's show is more about what children in Dominican Republic are doing, what they're experiencing. And okay, and also an interview with some presidents, but you know, the most part is really on children's lives. But if you are talking about, for example, issues like we had a big flood here in Germany last week. So if you really talk about things where people are dying, where it's really getting hard, there you need someone who can explain it, whom children and young people trust that they can explain it in the right way, because that's what they want. They want to understand what is going on and want to help or want to do something. And this is something where you need a little bit older person. Some years ago, we did a study on what kind of cultural ethnic background should a presenter have and what kind of gender. And the surprising thing is that actually children all over the world, we've done this in, I can't remember, 14, 15 countries, so all over the world. And they basically want a presenter in the same gender, if possible, and in the same ethnic backgrounds, but not, the only way you could see a difference is children growing up as Black minority group in a country, they don't trust a Black moderator because they have never seen one. So this also shows something when we always have to think about racism and these kind of things. We are all living in societies really multinational and where children are so diverse, and we don't show this on television. So if possible, don't choose the blonde, beautiful, a little bit stupid girl, but try to find someone who really stands for news.
Nancy, can I add to that?
Absolutely.
Because it's interesting what Maya touches here is also something we experience a lot in different countries. When there is no media experience with kids, these things happen, like Maya's example of when you never see black presenters on TV and suddenly there's a Black presenter telling the news. It is like a shock, but maybe Mathoba can tell us a little bit later about the situation in South Africa. But that doesn't mean, and I didn't hear Maya saying that sometimes you have to continue, you have to do it, and you have to break through barriers. But I wanted to say this is that if it's about television, and of course the majority is about social media and online, but if it's about television, the trust of the parents is also important, and there the young adult also plays a role. You know, so we've seen that we have hardly an adult audience in news programs where the presenter is very young, and when there is a young adult presenting the news, and you see that in all the news programs in Europe also, the public TV news programs, there's always a big adult audience watching it. Basically, I always say because this news is brought much more efficient and much more better and much more understandable than the main news, and usually with less polarization.
Great, thank you for adding that. Sandra, so it sounded like you have some different aged presenters. Can you talk to that, please?
Sí, gracias. En nuestro caso, Notichicos es presentado por una niña en compañía de una cotorra animada, una cotorra dominicana, que es un ave endémica del país.
So in our case, the show is presented by a girl, a Dominican girl, accompanied by a parrot. It's an animated parrot, and it's an endemic species from the Dominican Republic.
Y la idea de esta mezcla es que entre la cotorra y Sofía se den momentos jocosos para de esa forma llegar más fácil a la audiencia dominicana, porque para el dominicano en general el humor es indispensable.
So the whole idea of that mix is to generate humorous moments, you know, between Sofia, is the name of the presenter, and the animated parrot. And this is very important because for Dominicans in general, humor is very important as a way to reaching out to them and engaging them.
Y bueno, este humor se da, por supuesto, en los temas en que cabe, pero también hay otros temas más serios en los cuales lo que hacemos es que Sofía entreviste al adulto. Por ejemplo, con respecto a la temporada ciclónica, Sofía entrevista al director de la Oficina de Meteorología para que le explique qué es el huracán, por qué se da, cómo le ponen el nombre, para que haga las preguntas que un niño haría en esta situación.
And so we use humor when appropriate, of course. But also, you know, we also talk about more serious topics that wouldn't have that kind of interaction. So for example, Sophia might interview adults, right, experts, to talk about more serious topics. One example is when talking about the hurricane season, right? So she would interview the head of the Weather Service and try to explain everything about hurricanes. So what they are, how are they produced, how are they named, for example, and things like that. And in that case, then humor is really not something that will come into play.
Lo que hemos trabajado es que siempre haya un niño en escena. Aunque el tema sea adulto, aunque se esté interactuando con un tema de adultos, que siempre haya un niño en escena, y por eso hemos creado la sección reportero invitado, que es abrir la puerta a todos los niños dominicanos para que se conviertan en reporteros de un tema del cual son expertos, un deporte, una manualidad, una receta, una actividad interesante para ellos.
So one rule that we have is that there will always be one child on camera, you know, at all times. You know, when talking about more serious or adult topics. And so one way that we do that is we have started a section that is called a guest reporter or invited reporter. And that will be a child, can be any child from the country, right? That will be invited to be on the show. And they will talk about a topic that they are experts at, that they're passionate about, whether cooking a recipe, sport that they practice, anything like that. So that will guarantee that there's always going to be one child there, you know, being represented at all times.
Y la presentadora, que está desde los inicios del programa, empezó con 8 años y hoy tiene 12, pues ha logrado legitimidad y le creen los niños con respecto a cuando es algo más elaborado, más complejo, es el adulto el que lo dice. O sea, ella no teoriza sobre temas que no sabe, sino que es la que está presente y entrevista a ese adulto que maneja esa información, y de esa manera ella logra que esa información baje al nivel informativo de los niños.
And so it's been very important for the show that the presenter, we've had a presenter now for 4 years. She started when she was 8, she's now 12. So she's now recognized by the audience and has legitimacy. And so that helps a lot. And then also what we do is when she's interviewing an adult expert, then she's not the one who's, you know, talking about that expert subject matter, theorizing about it. She will ask the questions and let the adult, the expert, be the one that explains, and then she will sort of filter that information to a level that will be more understandable for kids, as a way of summarizing the information.
Gracias.
So this is really intriguing me to be thinking about the different types of topics, because we've talked about some serious topics and frightening topics. So Maya, I would love to hear from you about some of the research on frightening news for children and how to best present and cope with that.
Well, the first thing is that children are not frightened because of children's news. They are frightened because of what is going on in this world, and they see it, among others, on the adult news. So they see something, it might be on TV, it might be on a computer, it might be in a shop where they see a paper or a magazine, and they see some images. So, and frightening for children is first everything they don't understand. So if something is there, suddenly there is a car broken or there's a tree on a car, they will, what as good human beings we are doing, we see the danger, we see that something has happened, so we're getting frightened. Of course, we adults have big, we are not frightened anymore, but children will. So this is, so first thing is they really want to understand. And this is why they need news, which explains what is going on. At the same time, it's important when you explain something to children that you keep in mind there are certain things which very easily can make a fright reaction. For example, as soon as you see somebody bleeding, if you see something suffering, like really you can see this person is suffering. When they are a little bit older, mainly 10, 11, and you, for example, there's a big flood and you show a car and somebody is in the car and it's flowing away. The older ones will immediately see it and think, okay, and this person is gonna die. So first thing is, if you produce news for children, look for pictures which are not frightening, because if children are frightening, they're turning away. And that is not what we want. We want to involve them because this society, this world is also their world. The second one is be very sensitive to the sound. Sound is so important, especially when it comes to fright reactions, because often it's an unconscious kind of trigger, and this could frighten children. For example, or one of the very, in Germany, very often quoted examples is when Logo, which is our children's news, when they reported about 9/11, they took out the sound, or when they reported about Fukushima, they just put out and at that moment it's not as dangerous. So try to be very sensitive with sound, try to be very sensitive with the picture, and keep in mind it's important for children to understand what is going on, because as soon as they understand, it goes to a different level in their brain and they can talk about it. They can have names for it. So then they can deal with the fear, which normally if they just see something which looks scary and it sounds scary and everything is going down and this is real, they are just in fear.
Great. Oh, Motaba, do you want to kind of contribute?
Yeah, just to add on that, I'd like to give an example of something that was covered here in South Africa now during one of the lockdowns, when children were not going to school, understandably. So a lot of them are basically learning online, and which means that they have a lot of time to their hands, and children will always want to play, and they'll find ways to do things outside. And there was a story that was reported in Cape Town that made national news about these two boys who, because of the fact that they're at home, fell in a ditch, and both of them drowned, and they lost their lives and they both died. And kids saw this because it was covered so prominently on the news. But that's what the adult news stories were covering. And you can imagine, I mean, like you little kids, all of a sudden are going to be thinking, okay, what is happening here? And that can be a scary thing to take in for an 8 or 10-year-old. So what we then decided to do was to cover that same story. And in covering that same story, we tried to package it in a way that, okay, so this is what is happening right now. Because we have a lockdown, a lot of children are playing outside. And this is what happened to these 2 young boys. And what we then do is we add animations, because animations then take out the element of you having to portray the scary visual images. And with the animation and the voiceover in the background, we showed, these 2 boys playing around by themselves. But instead of showing the part of them actually falling into a ditch and then losing their lives, we then add in the element of to try and educate them. Okay, you may find yourself in a position like this. If you see something that you don't know, either step away from it or call an adult for assistance for something. So we also use it as an opportunity to, when something tragic happens that we know they have consumed, we use it as an opportunity to also give them the other perspective in saying that if you find yourself in a situation like this, this is how this could have happened differently, or this is how you could have done this differently. So as a way of educating them, trying to play a role to reduce that element of fear or of what they can get from the news that they consume, or that they see, or that they hear from their parents also on a regular basis.
Can I add to that, Nancy? Because what Muthoba in fact is saying, that we have to repair a lot of the damage that the main news is causing to kids. So we always have to be very alert on what is going on in the news, not only on TV, but also online, that might disturb them, and how can we, play a role there to put everything into perspective, and always have that debate of, like Muthoba is telling this story of everybody went there with the camera to film, of course, that hall where the kids died. Maybe they had a camera in front of the parents' house. The question, of course, is, what does this news represent in the life of children? Do children fall in ditches? How many a year? What does it represent more? What is the metaphor of? Maybe it's about security. Maybe it's about having safe roads. So we, in News for Kids, we have to look for much more deeper understanding and meanings of these kind of events than just covering it and just throw it on air. And that's why I say we have to repair a lot of the damage that is done. The other way around is also, when there is a hype, you can also ask the question, should we follow this hype, or did we already put a lot of news in our program on this subject that kids can understand what the hype now is happening? For instance, an example was the boy, the Syrian boy that drowned on the beach in Turkey, that iconic picture of the boy in the red shirt on the beach. In the Wadada News World Edition that we produced then in the Netherlands, and that was sent to our partners around the world, we were talking regularly about refugees. Kids were drowning already 5 or 10 years. So it was not something like news, it was an iconic picture. So we decided that the information that we had provided over the years in our program was already a tool for kids to cope with this image, so we didn't have to show that image. And that is a completely different way of thinking that you need to have when you make News for Kids compared to, let's say, mainstream news.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Similarly with that then, so with that child in mind as your audience, how does that impact your vision of news production and access to news? Perhaps Sandra, would you like to address that?
Sí, gracias. Bueno, antes quisiera aportar un poco con respecto al manejo de la pandemia en Notichicos. De nuestra parte, pues buscamos inicialmente informar de una manera clara sobre el virus, un comportamiento, pero haciendo énfasis sobre todo en qué pueden hacer los niños para protegerse ellos y su familia, para darles un sentimiento de esperanza y de que en sus manos también estaba solucionar esta situación.
So first, I wanted to talk about, when talking about difficult topics, the pandemic, the way we've handled that in the show. And what we tried was to provide information and to put an emphasis on what kids could do to protect themselves and their families. And so the emphasis there was on the positive, to give them a little hope in the middle of the situation as to this is what you can do. This is how you can play a role in trying to protect yourselves, the family, and the community. And so that was the emphasis in that case.
Y bueno, y luego darles herramientas para manejar el impacto de la pandemia. Por ejemplo, explicaciones para llevar de una manera exitosa las clases virtuales y cómo mantener su rendimiento académico, porque se dio en nuestro país que impactó seriamente el rendimiento académico de muchos niños la modalidad virtual.
And something else that we did that was particularly important for children was give them practical tools for online classes. So when all the learning went online, so how can you keep up your academic achievement during this time? And something that happened in the country was that academic quality and achievement went down significantly. So so the emphasis in the show was how to make the most of it, how to still continue to learn while being online.
Y también hicimos, por ejemplo, una entrevista a una niña que estuvo contagiada de COVID para que contara su experiencia, cómo se sintió y cómo superó la enfermedad. Y también, por ejemplo, sobre las vacunas. Cuando inició el tema de las vacunas, que había, bueno, si ponérsela, no ponérsela, si era confiable, pues también entrevistamos a expertos en la materia para que le aclararan a los niños este tema.
So we also interviewed a girl who had been sick with COVID to talk about her experience, so the kids will have a sense of what that was like. Also, when vaccines became available, we also provided information about it, the efficacy, safety, and in a way that kids would understand that.
Y bueno, ahora con respecto a la pregunta que recién me hace Nancy, pues para nosotros es claro, luego de estos 4 años de trabajo, que un noticiero infantil es indispensable. Es una herramienta indispensable para que los niños puedan apropiarse de su sociedad, apropiarse de su papel en el medio de la comunidad, en sus familias, en sus escuelas, y un elemento fundamental para lograr ese reconocimiento que necesitan para sentirse valiosos.
And now going to, back to the question that Nancy asked, after 4 years of working on this show, I think we are convinced that this is, having this type of program is essential for children, having this type of space, so that they can see their role in society, but also see their role within their families, within their communities, within their schools, and also for children to achieve that recognition as members of the community, as citizens. And we believe that it is crucial for them to have that space.
Y bueno, en un país con tan poca oferta de televisión infantil de producción nacional, Notichicos pues se ha convertido en un espacio pedagógico, no solo para los niños, sino para la familia entera, porque hemos descubierto que la familia entera ve Notichicos, aprenden de Notichicos y les permite a su vez comprender ese papel real del niño en la sociedad, no viéndolo desde la perspectiva de que es importante porque es el futuro, sino de que es importante por lo que es ahora siendo niño.
And also we have noticed that the show has also become an important teaching pedagogical tool for the families as well, so that then watch the show and learn a lot of things alongside their children. And also it has been helpful in changing the conversation about the role of children in society. We usually talk about how children are the future, but here the emphasis is no, they are the present, right now, and to see their importance, their contributions, and their role in society as something that is happening right now and not years down the road.
Gracias.
Wonderful. As we start drawing to the end, I'd like to ask Maya another question too. Thinking about access and children's reception of news, how can you speak a little bit to that about how are children accessing news? How do they get to these news sites?
Well, it depends in which country they are growing up. The best would be they have all opportunities, something we haven't talked about yet, a medium, which is radio. So at the moment, we are helping our radio department to renew their news for kids. Podcast is something which is really coming. So in an ideal world, children all over the world would have the access to the news they want on different channels. And in a way, radio, TV with pictures or just with words. Unfortunately, this often is not the case because we have not enough children's news. There are many countries like the US where it's not really children's news. Like, for example, in Germany, we have it twice a day on our children's channel. And then, well, if you really think about children, when they're 8, they will not go to the internet and start Googling what is happening there. They will just see, maybe as soon as they're on social media, they will see images. They will hear a lot of rumors, which really make this infodemic, for example, in the pandemic, with things which are really scary for them. So one possibility is, for example, in Denmark, they had, at least for a certain time, in school, they watch TV, they watch children's news always on lunchtime. So every day they just see it, they get into this rhythm. If you want to know what is going on, if you want to be involved in this world, watch news. And of course, watch news which are really made for you.
Great, thank you so much. And that brings us to the end of our time together. So thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining us and for our translator as well. And we look forward to future communication talks. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
Thank you all.